Welcome and good evening. My name is Seth Lewis, and on behalf of Harvard University Division of Science, Harvard Library, and the Harvard Bookstore, I'd like to welcome you to the latest installment in our Science Book Talk lecture series. I'm thrilled to introduce this event with Nicholas Money, who's presenting his latest book, Molds, Mushrooms, and Medicines, Our Lifelong Relationship with Fungi. Joining him tonight in conversation is fellow mycologist and Harvard professor Donald Pfister, right? Pfister? No? Before we move into the talk, a few things to keep in mind. Our next event is March 28th. Paul Halpern, The Allure of the Multiverse, Extra Dimensions, Other Worlds, and Parallel Universes. For more information and to stay up to date on all things Harvard Science Book Talks, make sure to subscribe to our newsletter, follow us on Twitter, and check out our YouTube channel. Our event tonight will be about 45 minutes, followed by some audience questions. At that time, if you raise your hand, someone will bring a microphone around to you, and we'll try to answer as many as possible. And when that concludes, we will make our way over to the Cabot Library for small refreshments and a book signing. And now it is my pleasure to introduce our speakers. Nicholas Money is the professor of biology at Miami University in Ohio and the author of many books, including The Rise of Yeast, How the Sugar Fungus Shaped Civilization, Mushrooms, A Natural and Cultural History, and Microbiology, a very short introduction. Joining him tonight is Professor Pfister. He is the Asa Gray Research Professor and Curator at the Farlow Herbarium of I don't know how to pronounce that word either, Cryptogamic Botany. He taught various courses over his career, including about fungi and trees and forests. His research is on fungal taxonomy and phylogeny. He has published on the history of mycology and the documentation of biological specimens. Tonight, they'll be discussing molds, mushrooms, and medicines, a book Alison Poyot calls a scintillating account of our inseparable relationships with fungi, both within and outside the body. We have a lot to learn this evening, so without further ado, I'm delighted to turn the stage over to our speakers. The floor is all theirs.
Thank you. Thank you. And despite the mispronunciation of things like phylogeny and cryptogamic botany, well done. 12 minutes. That's what I've given myself here to give you a complete overview of this book before we move to the more interactive part of the evening with our distinguished guest, Professor Don Pfister from Harvard. So I'm just here to help Don, really. All right, 12 minutes, time me. I called upon John Milton's muse as I began work on this exploration of the human relationship with the fungi, amending the appropriate lines from the greatest poem in the English language. There's no harm aiming high. And the book opens. Sing, this is from Paradise Lost, of course. Sing, heavenly muse, what in them is dark, illumine. What is low, raise and support, that to the height of this great argument, I may assert eternal providence and justify the ways of mushrooms to men. John Milton. So this book is the story of the human-fungus symbiosis near and far, from the mycobiome, which is the fungal part of the microbiome, that reaches from the surface of the body to the interior of the digestive system, and then looking outwards at the symbiosis beyond the body to the ways that we use fungi for food and medicines, the yin and yang of their poisons and psychotropic compounds, and all the way to the ecological activities of the fungi that make life on the surface of Earth possible for us. With the exception of my 2018 book, The Rise of Yeast, my writings on fungi have delved into the biology of my favorite organisms and ignored Homo sapiens. Now, with so much interest in human mycology, I wanted to explain what the science says about our fungal nature and clarify a few topics that have been strung out into nonsense by some popular commentators. At the age of 62, I've been studying fungi for 40 years, and it was time, or so I thought in my solipsistic fashion, to share some of the mycological wisdom that I've absorbed during this immense period of time. So I got 10 snippets for you, one from each chapter, that resonate with me before we move then to this more interactive part. Chapter 1, interacting. So we interact with fungi from the womb to the tomb. Now, I've been interested in toxic molds for a long time, and in another part of my professional life, I work with attorneys that are interested in issues of mold contamination of buildings and so forth. And often when I'm talking about toxic molds, I refer to this relationship with the fungi as from first breath to last gasp, which is indeed true with every breath we take. From first breath to last gasp, fungal spores are entering the body. But if we think about our broader relationship with the fungi, it's clear that it begins in the womb and follows us into the tomb. And the evidence for this in the womb, at least, comes from analysis of the meconium, so the first the first tarry deposit from the infant gut after birth, in which we detect a surprising amount of fungal DNA. So we're interacting with fungi in the womb, probably through fungi, yeasts that are present in the amniotic fluid that we know that the fetus is sipping from quite early in development. So from the womb to the tomb, if we're not filled with preservatives after death, we indeed are decomposed by fungi, in part, as I describe in the book. So that's part 1, or chapter 1. Chapter 2, touching. Fungi on the skin. It's interesting. I'm interested in the fact that the filamentous fungi that cause athlete's foot evolved in Africa, same place as us. And we carried them during our exodus in the Northern Hemisphere and transformed them from silent partners or commensals into really quite irritating pathogens through the act of wearing shoes. I've got a significant shoe fetish, but there's a downside to shoes. If you don't wear shoes with closed toes and socks, athlete's foot is less likely. More importantly, there's other modern cultural practices in which we engage that have profound effects upon the fungi on us and the fungi in the environment. So I'd like to think about Head & Shoulders shampoo, which is apparently produced by Procter & Gamble. I live in Oxford, Ohio. It's one of the biggest employers of our students from Miami University. So Head & Shoulders shampoo contains perithione zinc, which is an antifungal agent. So if you use dandruff shampoo, specifically Head & Shoulders, every morning, you're changing the fungi, the composition, the ecology of the fungi on the scalp every day, plus that material's being washed into the groundwater. This is having effects upon fungi, probably. At this point, I can't be sure what those are, but it seems to me pretty straightforward that we're doing something there, and we're certainly changing our relationship with the microbiome through the use of these shampoos. More importantly, we're using antifungal agents, azole antifungals in agriculture globally. Massive input of these fungicides in nature to control crop diseases. And in the book, I talk about Candida auris that you may well have heard about. It's this incurable kind of yeast infection, hospital-acquired infection. We could talk more about that in the Q&A. But it's come from nowhere, or it wasn't known as a pathogen at least, and the fungus was only first described a few years ago. Why is this thing resistant to antifungal agents? I think that our use of fungicides on a broad scale in global agriculture is affecting the development, the evolution of fungi. And that's probably far more important than the effect of climate change. Chapter 3, breathing. Brief reading here. Fungal spores as a cause of asthma. I don't know if there's any pulmonologists in the audience. any clinicians. It's funny, if you look at textbooks of pulmonology and allergy, the fungi, I've read, the whole books don't even mention the fungi as an important cause of childhood asthma. It's bizarre. Absolutely, I'm amazed by that fact. And I'm just brief reading here. There's a tiny bit of autobiography in here because I was a terrible asthmatic as a child. So I've got this intimate relationship with fungi through their effects on my lungs. And very brief reading here. Air. Air seems to coagulate during an asthma attack, with each inhalation urgently demanding conscious attention. Suffering from a severe bout of asthma in England in 1969, I spent hours bathrobed in front of the television watching the coverage of the Apollo 11 mission on the BBC. As Armstrong and Aldrin explored the lunar surface, the pauses in their conversations with mission control in Houston seemed to synchronize with the laborious rhythm of my breaths, so that I began to imagine that I was with them on the moon. It was an oxygen-deprived hallucination. Looking at the night sky after Armstrong's step and the flag planting, it seemed that the moon belonged to America. This evidence of the power of science convinced me that America was the place to be, not this chilly island with its stifling air supply, but the land that made all things seem possible. Spreading, fungal infections. Fungal infections I describe in the book ranging from toenail disintegration to the foulest flesh-melting diseases ever pictured in a pathology textbook. I also look at evidence for the onboard microbiome throughout the body in other organs, even in the absence of apparent disease. There's some really interesting work that's been conducted on healthy brain samples, well, after an autopsy, so anyway. But the presence of fungal DNA in apparently healthy brains. Do we have an onboard brain microbiome? This case is being made by some researchers. I present the evidence in the book. I'm honestly not sure what to believe at this point. It's pretty interesting. And the same for other organs in our body, that we at least find fungal DNA dispersed in other organs. Digesting. Trillions of bacteria in the gut, billions of fungi that weigh no more than a raisin. So if you look on the Wikipedia page for the mycobiome, it'll say it's just, billions of fungi, trillions of bacteria. They may not be very important. The thing is that is not recognized there is just how gigantic fungal cells are compared with bacteria. They're much, much bigger. If you look at that raisin's worth of fungi that are passing through every one of our guts right now, their surface area, combined surface area, is equivalent to the top of an 8-person dining room table. That is an immense surface area for interactions between fungi and our immune systems. And I think that this may be a big part of why we a big part of the explanation of how such tiny organisms and relatively small numbers can have such a profound effect upon our health, including their apparent influence on inflammatory bowel disease and even increasing interest in their role in cancer. 6 and 7 chapters, nourishing and treating. I talk about the story of our uses of fungi as wild food and as mold-generated mycoproteins like corn, and the controversial medicinal uses of mushrooms and mushroom extracts. I still to this day get more emails, angry emails from fans of medicinal mushrooms. I wrote an essay in 2016, review article, short review in a scientific journal with the title, "Are Mushrooms Medicinal?" And the short answer in that article was and is no. I was threatened with lawsuits and so forth. But my views have evolved, and I explain what they are in the book. 8 and 9, poisoning and dreaming from ergot to the mycotoxins carried by indoor molds. and onward to the contemporary use of magic mushrooms in the treatment of depression. Obviously, very newsworthy topic. In the penultimate chapter, I describe the pronouncements of Terence McKenna about alien mushrooms as one of the least enlightening things ever written about fungi. On the flip side, having gone back and looked at a lot of the literature from the 1970s, I'm beginning to believe that there were some really interesting ideas that were put forward then about mushrooms and the origins of Christianity. We could talk about that more, but there's some very, very compelling medieval works, tapestries, the Canterbury Psalter, stained glass windows in French churches, wall paintings also in Germany. Really, really interesting. There was something going on there. I'll talk about it in the book. Chapter 10, last chapter, recycling, the ultimate extension of the human-fungus symbiosis. And I talk about our unconscious dependence on the ecological activities of the decomposers that spin the carbon cycle, the fungi, and the mycorrhizal fungi that sustain Earth's botany. Why do we qualify that, Earth's botany? Does botany exist anywhere else? Well, we don't know. I'm going to read something. My own view on extraterrestrial mushrooms, just to prove what a great scientist I am. Kepler 1649c is an Earth-sized planet in the constellation of Cygnus, 300 light-years from our solar system. With its close orbit to a small star, climate models suggest that it is quite Earth-like in temperature. If Kepler 1649 is watery, it seems likely to harbor life. And if it accommodates anything more complicated than our bacteria, it is certain to be populated with fungi. Confidence in this untestable hypothesis is born from understanding the essence of fungi on Earth. Our fungi are the agents of entropy. No, we're all the agents of entropy. I'll edit that in the second edition. Fungi are the agents of entropy, transforming the energy captured in the web of life into the raw materials for the continuous regeneration of the biosphere. Without a group of organisms with these properties, the ecosystems of rocky worlds like Kepler 1649 would stall as planetary compost heaps of untappable energy. They must be there. The book closes with the ultimate extension of, at least the metaphor of the mycobiome, to the surface of the moon by the Apollo astronauts that I watched during my asthma attacks in the 1960s, who left samples of their guts in jettison bags on the lunar surface. Freeze-dried fungi, they're still up there. I'd love to get hold of a sample from those jettison bags from the 1960s and amplify the DNA from the yeasts that were present. So this book is the story of the fungi near and far. They are everywhere and will outlive us by an eternity. And in Mycospiramus, which I don't need to translate because I'm speaking at Harvard, and all of you are fluent in classical languages. Thank you. That's it. And now our distinguished guest, Professor Don Feaster.
Thank you very much, Nick. Everybody can hear me? Yes. Yeah, great. I'll let you get wired up here. So you've talked a lot about fungi, but you haven't told us what they are. How about you give that a try?
So, can everybody hear me? Definition of the fungi. They're the most glorious and interesting organisms on planet Earth.
I agree.
More than that.
More?
They're eukaryotes, so their cells have exactly the same structure as human cells. Not quite, but they're quite similar. They feed by absorption. They're not photosynthetic. They're not plants. So they steal food like we do from other organisms that have made it in the first place. What else? That's pretty good. They make spores, most of them.
You've worked on spores all your life, on spore discharge and so forth. Some of them swim, right?
Some of them swim. Zoospores of aquatic fungi, the chytrids and other aquatic fungi, yes, they produce. In fact, maybe in the end, most fungi swim. In terms of the real biological diversity of the fungi, that's this great misunderstood and undocumented part of nature, maybe a lot of it exists in the form of these aquatic organisms that are producing zoospores. They're called these swimming spores. They're a lot like sperm cells. And yeah, a lot of them do this.
Yeah. Some of these we know only from their DNA fingerprint.
That's right.
We've never seen them, but we know they're there because of their DNA.
It's actually one of the ones talking about spores with these tails, these flagella. There's only two groups of organisms that produce cells that swim in this fashion with a what's called a posterior flagellum that waggles and pushes the cell through the water or the fluid. So human sperm cells do this, other animal sperm cells do the same thing, and fungi do this. There's plenty of other things that swim with tails, but they use a fundamentally different propulsive mechanism.
So we have this kingdom fungi, which we've characterized a bit here. And the kingdom fungi is most closely related to animals.
That's right. And that was actually, so based on that swimming mechanism, that was predicted before the genetic evidence was in place, which is interesting.
So in the book, you talk about a number of diseases of humans and their treatment, and humans and animals. And that treatment often involves antibiotics that are derived from other fungi. So why is it so difficult? And those fungal diseases are pretty difficult to control and to take charge of. So why is that?
Well, one thing is that we rely on a very limited suite of chemicals to try and control fungal infections. The available medicines, it's pretty limited catalog that we have. But to get to your question, sort of fundamentally, why is this a difficult thing to do? That really relates to the fact that fungal, actually in the definition that they're eukaryotes like us, poisons that we use to destroy fungi that are growing in our tissues tend to damage our tissues too. It's very, very difficult to develop antifungal therapies that don't also really damage the patient. And often we see with liver and kidney damage being, the places where these side effects appear most readily. But that's part of the story. But there's also there needs to be a lot more work on antifungal agents. We're seeing that there are fungi like Candida auris that have evolved, and they've got this resistant to the available, what we call azole antifungal agents. Yeah.
Good. You've mentioned symbiosis in the book and in your presentation here. Often in popular literature or popular concepts, we think of symbiosis as being positive. Your definition is the classic definition of symbiosis.
As you're aware, the classical definition of the original symbiosis in the 19th century, it was just a term for interactions between organisms, different species. So one could think about the lichen symbiosis, this partnership between fungi and algae, but actually lots of other things too, now that other fungi. So that's actually a mutualism. And so we've got mutualistic relationships with, in fact, the fungi that are growing on the scalp. until maybe they get out of control and cause dandruff. So some of these relationships are supportive, others not so much. And so symbiosis runs the gamut from supportive mutualisms to parasitism and other isms.
You have a wonderful quote. You didn't use it, but I will. For a more enlightened sense of self, we have to close our eyes to the picture, to picture the body as a galaxy of cells, to say and to believe, I am a trinity born from one cell, copied in trillions, and filled with other forms of life. I love that.
Thank you.
Talk about that with symbiosis a little bit.
Well, just the fact, I suppose, that we're all walking ecosystems, that we feel ourselves to be singular individuals, and yet all of us are, we're interacting with one another now through probably transmitting viruses in this room, perhaps other microbes too. But no, I love that idea that we are these teeming ecosystems. What I struggle with, I'd love to do this before I'm sent off to Kepler 1649 for the deep sleep. I'd love to find a way of really imagining that immense inner ecosystem. I've been thinking about this a lot. You think about, what I read the other day, there's more neutrophils. If you had all of the neutrophils, so the if you got a good neutrophil count, all your phagocytic white blood cells, if you put all of those in a line, they'd stretch across the Atlantic. How can that be? They're so tiny. How can that be? We're not wired to make sense of these numbers or spaces. It's kind of like physical distances in astronomy. With space-time, we can make sense of stars, but if you think of physical distances to stars, it just becomes unponderable. And I find the same thing with thinking about microorganisms. I know it's true that my gut's got 1 trillion bacteria in it right now, but I can't relate to that well enough. I want to figure that out. I talked to an artist friend about this. What kind of a sculpture could you create that would embody this in some way? It's like you look down the microscope and you can see these little cells, but you look away and then everything's the macro world. I'm not making much sense right now, but if anybody's got any good answers. But anyway, that sentence was my attempt to express this.
I liked it.
Extraordinary fact.
You wrote a review. Didn't have anything to do with the book, but I wanted to bring this up. Hyphal and mycelial consciousness. The concept of the fungal mind.
Yes.
Anything you want to say
deliberately
about that?
Provocative title, but the title was too provocative probably, but in the article itself, what I'm really talking about is our use of language. Depending upon the way that we define consciousness, we see it throughout nature. And it was probably there with the birth of the first cell, however that happened, all the way to something as gorgeous as a Harvard professor. It's there in different forms of said consciousness. Arthur Reber's a psychologist that's written a lot about this, and I found, and I cite him in that article. If you try to look at where consciousness begins among other organisms, among animals. Descartes, obviously, what was that, 1637, he cuts it off with us. We're the only conscious things, right? Nobody sensible believes that anymore. Even philosophy professors don't teach that anymore. But where does it stop? Where does it stop? Look at a planarian worm. Look at Hydra. Look at Hydra that has a nervous system but no brain. It's so sensitive. It reacts to its surroundings. It's sensitive to light. it pretty much does everything that we do. And so I'm applying some of those ideas to the fungi and saying, yeah, they're exquisitely sensitive. They react to their surroundings. They are driven, as everything is, through our selfish genes to survive. They'll fight to the death. Yeah. The title may have got a lot of interest, but if you look at the, I'd stick by everything that's in the essay.
Great.
It doesn't mean mushrooms are conscious. That's the other thing. I get these emails from people that so there's this thing where there is indeed a British academic that sticks electrodes into a mushroom compost and supposedly detects these waves of electrical activity. And he actually wrote a paper, I don't know whether it was ever published, that he detected a fungal language and that it was more sophisticated, he said, than French. And he thought French... And he actually, in this paper, said, well, French, based on some criteria, is sort of the least sophisticated of European languages. Where am I going with this? But somebody asked me to comment on that paper. In fact, I did. I got to review it, and I said, you can stick 2 electrodes in a potato, and you'll get some electrical waves. Is the potato conscious? What language do potatoes speak? So there's a limit to how much consciousness I'm going to accord to my favorite organisms.
So I think we're probably close to doing questions from the audience, but I just wanted to bring up the question of fungi and religion, and you have to realize I grew up on fungi, studying fungi, and John Allegro and the sacred mushroom and the cross was a big deal when I was a graduate student. And you mentioned John Allegro in the book, in your book, and maybe you can just give us a little take about the religion here.
Well, I suppose that I guess there's more to this than I thought, big deal. Just looking at some of the scholarship that's been published in the last decade with analyzing, I mean, there are these wonderful stained glass windows with these images of monks carrying mushrooms and the date to, what, 13th century, 13th, 14th century. The presence of mushrooms in these in the early-ish church, right, in the medieval Christian church, they must have represented something important to those believers. I mean, they were meant to be seen by the parishioners that attended the churches. And so, I don't know, maybe he was onto something. There was a lot of very shoddy scholarship in Allegro's work as came to light at the time. But the idea that there may be some link between early worship of mushrooms, and probably through their hallucinogenic properties, and early religions, or the development of some monotheistic religions, that seems plausible to me. I'm fascinated by it rather than making a clearer point.
Great. Thank you. I think we can move to questions. Is somebody manning the microphones?
There are microphones here, aren't there?
I guess I am. Somebody's going to have to figure out how to turn them on.
Where's the bookstore?
I better not do that. We can pass it.
At last, the microphone. Thank you so much. You said so many provocative and sort of controversial things. I'm not going to touch the thing about the French language. We could set that aside. But
not my words.
Right. But could you speak to that?
Although Samuel Beckett wrote in French, didn't he? And he said that he wanted to write in French because there was sort of less flexibility. There was less room for error. With the English language, we got 50 words for
But Beckett was a mushroom phobe, I think. So, but anyway. Let's not go there. But could you speak to that a little more seriously? Could you speak to that comment you made earlier about the antifungal chemicals being used and the damage to the fungal world possibly being more dangerous than or more impactful than climate change?
Oh, so with the use of azole antifungals in agriculture, yeah, it just seems plausible. We paid so much attention, popular attention, to the use of antibiotics against bacteria in agriculture, but also in the overprescription of antibiotics, maybe among human patients, and obviously this interest in methicillin-resistant Staphylococcus aureus and so forth. This is a clear phenomenon, but that kind of attention has not been paid to the fungi. And so I'm merely wondering if that might be part of the reason that C. aureus has micro-evolved into this thing that is resistant to the available antifungal agents, because it was seeing them in the agriculture, in the soil, before it ended up in the hospital environment. And it's only acquired in hospitals. Generally, the infection is introduced through a catheter. And so this isn't something that the wider population is affected by at the moment. But Arturo Casadeval's MD, PhD, and mycologist that's very interested in this phenomenon. He actually thinks that climate change might be more significant. The thing is with climate change, as catastrophic as it is or will be, we're globally seeing a bit more than a 1 degree C increase in temperature at the moment compared with pre-industrial levels, pre-industrial temperatures. And I don't think that's enough to really affect the fungi. Many of the fungi that I've studied for years are pretty happy growing at well above body temperature. I don't think it's a barrier, but that's going beyond your question. Yeah.
Thank you.
Can you hear me? Hi. Thank you so much. I'm wondering about you've alluded to it, but the microbiome we know has changed dramatically over the course of our lives. I think we had a greater diversity like back in the 60s. And I'm wondering if you can speak to how it may have changed in our gut for the fungi as well.
Yeah,
like
that's a great question. And so how much is the mycobiome on board? At least think about the one in the digestive system, which exists all the way from the mouth to the anus, different fungi in different locations. Almost certainly this has changed during our lifetimes, or my lifetime anyway, if you think over 60 years, as our diet has changed and as we're using different consumer products, we're taking different medicines and so forth. But the research is really lacking at this point. We don't really know. There are some very provocative studies that look at the effect of different dietary practices on the microbiome. And that I talk about that in one of the chapters in the book. And so you see that with people in some beautiful work from China where populations have moved from a more rural agricultural setting into a big city. And you see these changes in the fungi that are growing in their guts. The effect of this on the health of those individuals, we don't know at this point. But you can begin to do some thought experiments about that. Why are we seeing such an increase in different inflammatory conditions of the digestive system? There's also some lab groups that, I hate to mention it. I mean, it gets into the tabloids. The Daily Mail seems really interested in fungal stories. They had a thing about the fungal connection to bowel cancer. We're seeing a tremendous increase in the rates of colon cancer, colorectal cancer among younger patients in this country and elsewhere. The thing is, if you see a change in the onboard fungi, that could be a cause or consequence of. That's the difficult thing. I talk about that a lot in the book, discriminating between cause or consequence in medicine.
Just building off that question, we see a lot of marketing of products that are kind of probiotic, supposedly good for the gut health. Is there any evidence that using those products is destructive or harmful? Maybe they're an overstatement of the benefits, but is it actually an unintended consequence of anything bad? And on a maybe unrelated question, should we be concerned about the rise of superbugs and kind of resistance to overprescribing antibiotics, and can we come up with alternatives that are just as effective?
Yeah. What was your first question?
Overuse of is probiotic actually harmful?
Are they harmful? That's right. There's no real evidence that these probiotic products are harmful. I mean, that's the good side of the medicinal mushroom business. There's nothing here that's harmful, but some of them are expensive. But there is one fungal probiotic that's proven to work. So it's sold, and it's actually, back to the French here, the French language. It's sold as, I don't know the trade name. It's a species or strain of Saccharomyces, the yeast called Saccharomyces boulardii. And it's got a really interesting history. It was discovered by a French explorer. Anyway, that actually is a proven useful treatment for travelers' diarrhea. It settles the digestive system, and you can buy it in CVS, Walmart, you name it. So there is one that really definitely works. Procter & Gamble's has a lot of probiotic drinks that that they recommend that you should swig every day. They don't do you any harm, but whether they do any good, the evidence isn't there.
And about superbugs?
Candida auris, yeah, but sooner or later, one might dismiss hospital-acquired infections, but then we all go to hospital at some time or another. So these are significant, yeah. Candida auris really has spread across the globe in less than 5 years. It's been detected in hospitals pretty much globally now. And it is really, really difficult to treat. It does affect patients that are quite seriously ill with other conditions at this point. So the idea of super fungi wiping us out. The other thing that's been in the news, so there are some fungi that are usually begin as respiratory infections, and they seem to be, their distribution is changing. Now, that probably is an effect of climate change. So blastomycosis, anybody from Wisconsin? So that was an outbreak of blastomycosis recent in Wisconsin, also in Michigan. And it's not clear why that fungus is causing more problems than it used to. Probably climate change.
Hi, I'm here because I'm reading a book called Into the Wild, and I just happen to be reading it now. And so the title of your talk really got my attention because I don't know if you know this book or this movie by John Krakauer. It was written in...
I've heard of it.
The guy died at 24 years old in 1992, and he was in Alaska. But first they thought he died from seeds of a wild potato. But then the new theory John Krakauer or somebody else came up with was that it was mold on the seed that killed him. That he wasn't really a jerk. He had a very good book on edible things in wilderness, but it did say he could eat that. But what do you think about that theory? That's why I came. That's why I wanted to ask you. And then I also wanted to know about benefiber, but some guy already asked that question because my doctor told me to take it. I don't know.
Okay. So we have, so there are fungi, there are molds that grow on foods. And in fact, they grow on every commodity, every food commodity. And so we eat corn in our diet in some form every day. Most of us do. But it's also on other cereals. If you're a big meat eater, there are these toxins produced by molds that end up in the food chain, and we get them through meat, through farmed fish. So there are fungi that produce these toxins, and they're mycotoxins. In high concentrations, those mycotoxins cause liver cancer. And that's very, very clear from some repulsive animal experiments. Anyway, you feed animals a lot of mycotoxins, and they'll develop liver cancer. And so this is clear. The quantity that we get in an American diet is really, really small. We've got bigger things to worry about. We've got an election in November. We've got other things to concern ourselves about other than the mycotoxin dose. But there's certainly, we're accumulating these mycotoxins through our food. It seems to be inherently unlikely that he could have eaten enough of this contaminated grain to have been the cause of his early demise. But then you can think about the ergot fungus and the terrible effects on populations that were eating rye bread made from rye that was contaminated by this fungus. So show me the evidence.
Do you eat peanut butter?
Peanut butter is another great one. Tell us about peanut butter.
Peanuts support fungi that produce mycotoxins. So there are levels that are acceptable of mycotoxins in peanut butter.
Yep. And the Peanut Institute's got a big statement about that on their website, the American
I don't know
Peanut
that.
Institute. And so, yeah, that's, again, we're inhaling these spores all the time. So
I think we have time for maybe 2 questions.
Given that fungi are in fashion at the moment, what myths do you think are important to dispel?
that's a great question. Well, there's a lot.
And then can I also ask you if you've had any hallucinogenic experience?
That's probably the more interesting question. So I had a brief moment of fame almost 10 years ago where I was on Terry Gross's show, Fresh Air. And I think they broadcast like half an hour of the interview. We talked for a lot longer. We talked about hallucinogens in that, but that part of it was never broadcast. But she said to me then, if you're willing to go to Johns Hopkins and take the hallucinogens and come back, I'll have you on the show again. And as desperate as I am for, exposure, I wouldn't do it. I wouldn't do it. It's I'm not comparing myself with Richard Feynman. That would be stupid. But I mean, he said once, the brain's the most important. It was his most important toy. It was his favorite toy, and he didn't want to screw with it. So that's basically where I'm at. I don't trust myself to undergo that experience. I had a student at Miami that gave me a baggie of mushrooms as a graduation gift. And they were in my desk drawer for a while, and then I didn't take them. The myths to dispel, there's a lot of them. I mean, this is a frustration for me my life it's the life of the scientist. I love science, and I have to see evidence, or what I regard as evidence. And because mushrooms have become so popular, there is so much interest in our relationships with fungi, and metaphors just get stretched. And we've seen this in so many areas of mycology. I don't even know where to start. There's so many. I suppose one interesting example of this would be, you might be aware of this stuff about the mother tree and Simard's work on mycorrhizal fungi, and there have been some publications recently that have really suggested that those ideas were just stretched too far, and they don't make evolutionary sense. The idea of that level of cooperation. So that's I mention that in the book, but there are many other topics. Medicinal mushrooms certainly stretch to the idea that these are the cure-alls. I guess overall it would be the worst thing is, boy, I'm good at making enemies, aren't I? It's one of the greatest TED Talks of all time, apparently, in terms of the number of views. How mushrooms are going to save the planet or save the world. It's bullshit. I mean, we're the problem here, and the mushrooms are not going to get us out of this. It's absolutely implausible. It's wishful thinking. And I think it comes actually from some of our deeply rooted ideas that are the supernatural views that we have of the fungi, that they have these kind of powers. They can cure cancer and they can restore a forest that we've shaved down to the bedrock. No, they can't. they can't. And then there's 10 other things, but you'll have to read the book.
Nick, this is a non-scientific utterance. You mentioned how civilized mushrooms were about their purported ability to speak French. Even more civilized is their ability to sing in Czech. According to composer, mycologist Václav Halík, Czech composer who recorded 1,500 songs from mushrooms in the woods adjacent to his home in Czechoslovakia.
Yeah.
And to me, this triumphs over an ability to speak French, even ability to quote Proust, if any mushrooms are quoting Proust.
I can't disagree with that. That sounds marvelous. If many of you, if you have an interest in mycology, you've surely looked at Merlin Sheldrake's best-selling book. Merlin Sheldrake, his brother, whose name escapes me, he's a musician.
Cosmos.
Cosmos. And so he's actually using microphones that he's pushing into into soil and peat bogs and so forth, and listening to nature and recording nature in that way. I don't know whether that's related to this Czech composer's oeuvre or not, but John Cage, of course, was famously fascinated by mushrooms, but yeah.
John Cage suggested that if you play a Beethoven string quartet for a toxic mushroom, it would lose its toxicity.
Did he try it?
I think we have time for one.
In 2017, I went to the Telluride Mushroom Festival in Telluride, and one of the McKenna brothers said, "Oh, this year someone has published an article saying that psilocybins are serotonin blockers. They block the receptors for serotonin." Now, I wondered if you think this is true, and a corollary is, why do psilocybins, when taken for therapeutic reasons, have an effect that may last for 4 to 6 months?
Great question. So psilocybin, so it's converted after we ingest it, it's converted to psilocin, which is a serotonin mimic. Looks a lot. I mean, chemical structure is very similar, and so it will bind to a subclass of serotonin receptors, and that's how it has this profound effect upon our consciousness. Not that I've ever experienced it myself. There are some experiments that suggest that the effect may be long-term, in that this is actually causing I don't know how long it's going to last, but some rewiring of the brain. So this is based upon experiments on rodents and seeing changes in neural connectivity days after the psilocybin dose has been administered. So it's possible, it seems plausible, that a mechanism like that may be part of this story. I believe so. Well, no, I don't know enough about them. There are studies on rodents that have shown this. I don't know enough about that research to say whether or not that's the case. This whole thing of neural connectivity too, there are similar experiments that have been done with other drugs like ketamine too, and there seems to be something there, that it's not just that one-off effect of the dose. So my guess is that yes, those have been replicated by now.
That will be all of our questions for tonight. If you'd like to, you can join us in the Cabot Library for a small reception and book signing to our lovely authors.